Hello and welcome to a new episode of Interpreting India. From geopolitical complexities to economic uncertainties, India faces critical challenges in its quest for a more prominent role on the world stage. This season, we at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. In today's episode, we delve into one of the most consequential debates shaping the future of artificial intelligence development, the open versus closed debate. This debate goes far beyond technical choices made and could carry profound implications for global innovation, safety, and the distribution of economic power. On the one hand, market forces appear to be driving the push for open source AI, with developers seeking alternatives to proprietary systems, researchers advocating for transparency and collaboration, and companies looking to break free from the grip of big tech. There are also policy and regulatory concerns surrounding the potential risks that could emanate from openly released foundation models, including harmful content generation, cyber attacks, or worse. The recent release by Chinese startup DeepSeek of its open source R1 LLM, which rivals the performance of LLMs built by industry giants in the United States, has also brought new urgency to this issue. However, on the other hand, closed models also present their own set of concerns. From the concentration of AI capabilities in the hands of a few powerful companies, to limited transparency and accountability, to potential barriers to innovation and competition. There are also questions about whether keeping models closed could actually provide the safety benefits that proponents claim. At the heart of this tension, therefore, lie a few fundamental questions. 1. Do the rewards associated with open source development of AI outweigh the risks? Is closed source more conducive to responsible and safe AI development, or does it simply create different vulnerabilities? And lastly, can we balance the transparency and democratization benefits of open AI models with legitimate safety concerns associated with them? For India, this debate also presents a chance to become a global leader in transparent AI innovation by building a robust open source ecosystem, reducing dependency on foreign AI infrastructure, and harnessing its existing tech talent, all the while maintaining a balance between innovation and responsible development. I'm Shruti Mittal, research analyst in the Technology and Society program at Carnegie India. Joining me for this episode and to provide a technologist's perspective on some of these issues is a distinguished guest, Dr. Kailash Nadh. Kailash is the Chief Technology Officer of Zerodha, India's leading stock brokerage platform, and has led Zerodha's technology and product stack development since 2013. He's also the co-founder and director of FOSS United, a non-profit foundation based in Bangalore that aims to provide grassroots support to free and open source software projects and communities in India. In addition to being a full-stack software developer with more than 2 decades of technical experience, Kailash holds a PhD in artificial intelligence and computational linguistics. His most recent writings also provide a compelling analysis of open source software developments and AI breakthroughs, including in the Indian context. Kailash, welcome to Interpreting India.
Thank you, Shruti.
It's really great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time. So, in my introduction to this episode just now, I used the term open source quite a few times. Open source AI, without really explaining it. So, could I maybe request you to give our listeners a brief but colorful sort of understanding of what open source as a model of development means and has meant for so long. And then if you could tell our listeners what open source AI is, what open source AI isn't, and why does this difference matter? Why should anyone really care about it?
Open source as a development model, I would say that that's a rather recent understanding or interpretation, especially the post-tech internet boom period, which has really started defining open source as a development model. Although it's absolutely legitimately it's legitimately a development model. However, if you go back maybe around 40 years, open source software started from the free software movement, a rather political, ideological movement. The early tinkerers and hackers, software folks, people like Richard Stallman of the 80s, and this can be traced back to even the 60s, to the dawn of computing. So, in the free software ideology, it's very similar to the whole information must be free or information yearns to be free sort of a thing, that line of thinking. You get the liberty to build, create, change, give away software as you see fit. It's a creative expression. It's a form of art. It's seen like that, not just a utilitarian thing. So if I give you software that is considered to be free software, and that consideration has a legal backing, there are these things called free software licenses or open source software licenses. It's literally a few lines of text. It's like a loosely binding contract. So when you get a piece of software which is free software or open source, I'll get to the distinction quickly. Uh, then you're bound by its rules, and the rules are rooted in really simple forms of liberty. I think there are four. Generally, it's considered to have four tenets: the freedom to read, the freedom to change, the freedom to distribute, the freedom to use software as you see fit. Now, this is the antithesis of commercial or proprietary, not commercial, proprietary software, where one company or a vendor builds something and they give it to you, and you're bound to use it the way they stipulate. You don't have access to it. You can't see inside it. You can't see its source code. If something goes wrong, you really have to look upwards to the vendor to fix it for you. So you're at the behest of the proprietary black box software vendor. It started out as a political movement against that, and people started writing software and started releasing the code out there saying you take it and use it, but uh, you have these liberties, and if you change it, you have to also share the changes. Now that is the some people call it infectious, the infectious nature of certain free software licenses, but that's really the spirit of it. You're getting it with full liberties. If you change something, if you improve it, you are now ethically obliged to share it back. So that's how it started. Then soon enough, lots of people got involved, commercial companies got involved, and then came the open source thing. So there's a distinction between free software and open source. So open source is a development model, which is a subset of free software. But free software in general is a more political, ideological model. So the open source folks said we don't have to have such strict licenses. We can have simpler, easier licenses as a development model. So I'll give you software and source code, you use it, you change it, but you don't necessarily have to give the changes back. It's okay. You can keep it private. So free software got a little watered down, and it's still, even 40 years later, it's a huge ongoing debate. So then there is free and open source software. And there's FLOSS, free, libre, open source software. So largely these things are all uh, a tangle of the free software political movement plus open source as a development model. I use all the terms except for free software. I use them interchangeably because personally I believe that the way forward lies somewhere in between. You don't have to be extremely ideological, and you don't have to be so close-minded as to you completely undermine the ideology. So I generally use the term FOSS, free open source software. And over the last 40 years, from a hobbyist hacker thing, it has become mainstream. The entire internet today runs on open source software. Space station runs open source software. Every single mobile device runs open source software. Companies like Zerodha are pretty much built on 90% open source software. The best possible databases, the best possible programming languages, the best possible frameworks, everything, everywhere you look, it's all dominated by free and open source software out there. So you pick them up, you use them however you want. And if you make changes, you abide by the license and release it back. The biggest misconception, I think, maybe the word free was really the wrong word to go by, is that, and this is still a huge misconception today, is that if something free software or free and open source software is bound to be free, as in it's free of cost. That is not true. Free there.
So there's that phrase that I think Richard Stallman likes, which is free as in freedom, not free beer.
That's
right?
correct. Yeah. And the ramifications of that one word, free, from 40 years ago, it's still playing out. There's still chaos, confusion, just that one word. But yes, what you just said is right. Free is free as in freedom, the four freedoms, liberty, not really cost. So I can write free and open source software and I give it to you according you full freedoms, but I can charge you for it. So labor, time, effort is not free, but the code can be free, which comes with all the liberties. So this also, from a political movement, this is a software development model. And like I said, pretty much everything, all the software technologies that the world runs on today, free and open source software built by companies, built by hobbyists, individuals, globally maintained. It's probably the biggest cross-cutting collaboration project, the amalgamation of collaboration projects in the history of mankind is open source software collaboration. And it clearly makes sense for AI also. At the end of the day, stuff that we are doing today is software. Most of all these large language models, all the tooling around them, the software required to build them, software required to train them, it's all largely just open source. Now, the model itself, like you mentioned earlier, there are proprietary companies, they're building them closed, but the entire tooling, including the research that spawned this big breakthrough in open source, which is the transformer model, transformer as a concept from Google. The research was also open. So open plus replication plus collaboration, these concepts are all intertwined. And that's why internet tech, this video call, all of these things exist. So some AI companies have taken the open source route, while the others are trying to build black boxes to preserve their moat. And DeepSeek is the best example. There are many, many open source models out there. In fact, people have taken closed source models and tweaked and turned them, distilled them, changed them into open source models also. At the end of the day, it's bytes that you get, binary, right? And you just have to abide by its licenses. And yeah, so that's, I think, like a 5-minute summary of free software, open source, and here we are with AI/open source.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So to double click on that, what do we mean by open source when we're talking about it in the context of AI? Because, like you said, it's still a model of development. If we leave sort of the distinction between free software and open source software aside for a minute, it's a model of development, but the artifacts are a little different, right? So could you also just maybe explain to us what do we mean by open source AI? And also because, like you said, even in the software space, that debate around definition is still sort of going on. And in the AI context, it's now starting to happen where people are interested in defining open source AI. And again, in my introduction, that was a false dichotomy. It's not open versus closed, right? Yeah. There's a lot in the middle. So could you maybe explain to us why the difference matters between when someone says open source AI and someone calls something open source AI, but it's not?
With AI, it has really been murky. An AI model is a digital artifact. The tool required to run that model is another digital artifact. There's a whole series of different things. And the definition of open has also been really stretched by some of these proprietary AI orgs. When it comes to software, it's well understood, it's clear. If it's free and open source software, I get the source code. I should be able to compile the source code and run the program myself. It's that simple. And I should be able to understand and read the source code. If somebody obfuscates the code in such a way that I can't read it or I can't run it myself, then it's not really open source. But with models, when we say model, we are really referring to weights. That's the term that is used. And model weights are literally a long series of, let's say, numbers represented digitally as an artifact. You can think of a model as a very large file, several GBs full of numbers. And those numbers have higher representations and meanings, but it's literally one giant file in really simple terms. So there's this thing called open weight models now. Because imagine, take a company like Meta. They were kind of pioneers in doing the whole open thing, not open source yet. When they released Llama, they released it under a certain license, not really a well-known open source license, where it permitted very liberal use of the model. So you could take it, you could change it, do whatever. There were a bunch of stipulations. But did you get the data that went in? Did you get the tooling that was required to create that model? No. So you just got one artifact inside which you can't peek because it has no source code. You got the artifact itself saying, do whatever you want. If you remember back in the day, in the 90s and 2000s, you'd get WinZip as a tool to archive and unarchive programs. You didn't get the source code. Those things were called shareware or freeware programs. So somebody built something, and the final compile artifact was distributed. People were free to use it uh, uh, forever, practically. But if you wanted to change something, if you wanted to peek inside, there's no source code. So open weight models are basically that. You're getting this massively powerful, revolutionary model, which is one giant file. You plug it into your software and you use it infer. It's called inference. You interact with the AI however you want. But if you want to change something, if you want to peek inside, you want to figure out how it was built, there's no source code. So that's an open weight model. I would say that somebody, a large company releasing an open weight model is far better than it not releasing anything at all. But is that really open source in the spirit? Does it conform to the definition of free and open source software from the software realm? Not really, no. Then there have been other models who conform to uh, the conventional understanding of open source more, where all the tooling, all the ancillary software required to build the model yourself has been released. How it was created, the parameters that were used, they've all been released as open research. There's a research component here. Even if I give you the tooling, you may not be able to recreate the model unless I also tell you exactly the parameters that were picked. So it's a coagulation of different kinds of artifacts. You need open research, you need open source software tooling to build this. You also need data. Now, data is the really tricky bit here. We know that the biggest AI companies, closed, open, semi-open, etc., they've all scraped off the internet, trained their models on massive amounts of copyrighted material. Now, even the most well-meaning company who really likes open source can't really release that data because of these obvious issues. So even with DeepSeek, they can't ever legally release, although their model tooling, research, etc., they've opened up, they can't really release the training data. So DeepSeek, you can use it in the most unrestricted way because they have picked the right licenses. But can you, using the research and tooling they've opened up, create your own version of DeepSeek? No, because you don't have the data. So that question mark still remains. Even if you have the right licenses, the right spirit, the right artifacts opened up in the right manner, like in open source software where you can just download the code and do it yourself, compile the artifact yourself, can you do it with large language models? You can't, because that data, the juice of this entire thing is unshareable for obvious reasons. So then how do you call something a truly open source AI model? I don't think anybody has an answer yet.
Apart from like the calling a model open source for the sake of calling it because it fits the definitional criteria, from a standpoint of innovation, right? Why is the difference between an open weights model and an open source model, like, is that difference really that stark? Because like you said, yes, the training data is not open, but if we take the example of DeepSeek, right, if they have sort of explained their methodology and their techniques, so like a reasonably skilled person should be able to um, adopt them or use them, right? And um, I guess what I'm trying to ask is that, are we collectively interested in this definition, or trying to define open source AI just because there exists some prior understanding of what open source is and these models don't technically fall into it, and that's why we're constantly making this distinction? Or from the point of view of innovation and the pace and driving innovation, could you maybe just explain that a little bit more? Yeah.
I think we have to have a nuanced take here. And I think the nuance here is that data should be treated and seen as a separate thing. Like I said, with software, it's easy. if I build a tool, I give you the source code, which could be, I don't know, 100 files, 10 files, or whatever, and that's it, done. But AI is not that. AI has so many different components, and the most important being data, which you can't classify as code or software. There's videos, there's movies, there's everything, every bit of public information humanity has ever published. That is a giant collection of data as an artifact that goes into AI. How could that be distributed from a legal perspective, right? So when we say open source I think that blanket term isn't valid just yet because the elephant in the room is the data. You can open up everything else, but if you can't open up the data, then it's not really fully open source in the sense of open source software. That said, is there a bit difference between open weight models and open source models where the weights are bound by a truly open source license? I think, yes, there's a big difference. So I can take DeepSeek R1 and I can do whatever I want with it. I can use it in any context. I think it comes under the Apache license, which is a very popular open source license used for software. Yeah, that's what I think it is. So I can take it, I can change it, I can cut it in half, I can do whatever I want. And there are no legal ramifications. Now, can I recreate my own R1, DeepSeek R1 from scratch? I can't because I don't have the data. But this artifact they've given, the research they've given, the tooling they've given, I can do whatever I want with it. I can distribute, I can redistribute. Can you do that with an open weight model? No. The license clearly says that you can only use it for these purposes, use it for research. You can't use it for commercial purposes. So an open weight model is better than getting nothing, at least from an academic curiosity perspective. But an open source model where even if you don't have all the data, I would put it far higher than in value and utility than an open weight model. Because it comes with those liberties and freedoms.
Understood. And I think it might be the MIT license.
Now, could be MIT. Yeah, I can't recollect. But it's an open source software license that they've used.
Yeah. So speaking more about the landscape in general, I feel like there's a little bit of a shift taking place where since, say, the generative AI entered the public consciousness, say, in November 2022 with ChatGPT being released and so on, I could be reductive. The shift is from closed to open. And so, in 2023, there was this you may be aware, there was this very interesting sort of leaked internal Google memo from a senior engineer. And that had really made waves because he, in that memo, was arguing that both Google and OpenAI were actually losing the AI arms race, but not to each other, but the open source community.
Yeah.
And fast forward to this year, the DeepSeek moment, it seems to have sort of been some kind of a wake-up call that's reshaping strategies across the industry.
Yeah.
OpenAI very recently, which OpenAI hasn't released an open weights model since GPT-2 in 2019, right?
Yeah.
But now they announced, in a Reddit forum post, Sam Altman was saying they're reconsidering their approach and they plan to release an open weights foundation model by apparently this summer.
Yeah.
So the question really is, what's driving this sort of, that seems recent, embrace of openness in AI? What do you think is behind this sort of seemingly strategic pivot towards greater openness?
I think it's largely, obviously, strategic. It's not that some of these large companies care about open, decentralized development, but if you don't participate, you lose out. And then DeepSeek comes along, and I'm guessing the reason for doing this also must have been very strategic, maybe even at a geopolitical level. I don't know. So when you tell the world that it's possible to build something so amazing, better than everything else, and give it out there and do it at a fraction of the cost, then the massive valuations that the closed off companies have built, that is largely undermined. And then people start asking questions. And the beauty of open source, and that's why the software tech world today runs the way it does, is that once you put something out there, there's a massive number of people who take it up on themselves, passionate people around the world who improve it in decentralized ways. No development model can really compete with that. You can hire 10 people or 100 people. You can put in all the resources you want. You can build something great. But when thousands, if not tens of thousands of passionate people from all walks of life from across the world come together and make it their mission, driven by incentives of passion and commitment, not really maybe financial, and they start collaborating on stuff, you can't really stop that. There are very few examples of open source producing inferior software to closed source. Very, very few examples. So it's a no-brainer. And all AI companies need developer mindshare to begin with. Yes, you have a chat UI that all these companies have chat UIs that they've given out to hundreds of millions of people. But for true adoption, true integration, true what's the word? Self-sustaining perpetuation of these technologies and their norms and their protocols, you need tech people to buy into your stuff. And tech people buy into open source stuff. I can do a couple of clicks and start tweaking DeepSeek R1. And DeepSeek now has my mind share. And a lot of tinkering that I do will be around that. I'll open source something, I'll maybe fix their tooling for them. I can do whatever. And then on the other hand, you have a black box proprietary company who has its own team, but you're completely disjoint. You have millions of users, but the users will shift from your chat UI to the other company's chat UI the day the other one seems a little better. And that's what's been happening now. So yeah, please.
So sorry to cut you, but so then what I'm understanding is that that competitive moat that companies thought they had by closing models, that's not the case anymore, because openness or opening a model, like you said, it allows for greater investment by individual developers to. So what is that like? If you could maybe tell me a little bit more, because even open sourcing is strategic, right?
Yeah.
Closing was strategic, but opening is also strategic. There's some sort of soft power involved, or wanting to become the industry standard, right? To some extent. So what is the strategic value of opening? Is it what you just said, that they're realizing that the open source communities innovates faster than anyone ever anticipated?
Yes, it's a bit of all of that. So companies kept models private as long as they could keep it private. When you have built this thing, which can only be built with billions of dollars of hardware and investments, no individual or nonprofit or open source developer can compete with that. So all the large language models early on were entirely proprietary because nobody else can replicate it. It requires massive amounts of tangible resources. Then for competitive reasons, somebody else comes along and does an open weight model just to spite the other one. These are all, big orgs competing strategically, trying to undermine. And then the final blow was literally DeepSeek coming along and just opening up everything. So these views of the strategic views of open, closed, etc., have evolved rapidly, literally on a weekly or monthly basis across these organizations for various reasons. Them trying to undermine each other. Then somebody else figures out that this gets a lot more mindshare. But ultimately, mindshare is also a really big, important factor. When you have millions of programmers and techies who are employed in numerous places, spending a lot of their time thinking about your technology, that translates. If I have to decide on which AI to integrate in a certain organization, I mean, all of these factors play in, right? If you're familiar with a certain company's tech because it's open source, etc., you played around with it, you experimented with it. Then when a technical decision has to be made by technical people, then it's very likely that you'll go with the thing that you're familiar with that gives you the flexibility. On the other hand, many of these AI tech decisions across large organizations are not really even made by tech people. That's the other unfortunate side. They're made by business people, driven by business incentives or sales relationships and whatnot. That aside, when you get developer techie mindshare, that is a huge moat in itself. And one of the biggest pivots, perhaps in the history of computing and software, would have been Microsoft some 10, 15 years ago, suddenly becoming a very pro open source company. They buy GitHub, the world's largest open source developer platform for untold billions. They buy NPM, the open source JavaScript package repository. They release VS Code today, used by millions and millions of developers. So they've spent billions of dollars and completely shifted their tech strategy just to get the mind share of techies. And that's a great, tangible, verifiable example. So there are many, many factors, and companies trying to undermine each other's efforts, plus trying to get developer mindshare, plus trying to ride on the free innovation that comes along when millions of people start participating. It's a bit of all of those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So if we were to sort of shift our focus now to like another area, which is like policy considerations, where now apart from tech companies and researchers, we've got like policymakers also sort of weighing in on this discussion, both in terms of governance and regulation and in terms of what they choose to support, out of national interests, perhaps. So I see like trade-offs on both sides, right? Now, like as we talked, there are rewards attached to open source AI development, but there could be risks that flow from openly releasing foundation models, like cybersecurity, for instance, one of them. Particularly in the hands of malicious actors. And then similarly, in the case of closed models, there are concerns of maybe limited transparency, like you mentioned a few times, and accountability. But they might have greater, more centralized control over other vulnerabilities. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what you see as the risks and rewards on both sides of this debate? Because there must be, right? So how do you sort of see this? Yeah.
I don't have a clear answer, but I have some thoughts around this. And I've seen the examples I've seen instances where AI has been, as a technology, has been compared with nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are proprietary. So such fundamental physical technologies. But the thing about AI and today's form of AI is that it's software. It proliferates instantly. It's not like physical hardware like nuclear weapons. So if you build AI software, others will also figure out how to build AI software. That's what we've seen. So many companies today, large and small, building AI to AI of different kinds to different degrees. Rogue actors, be it individual rogue actors or be it, I don't even know, international rogue actors, rogue nation states. People who want to use this stuff for malicious stuff will figure out a way. And if you gatekeep it saying that only these three companies should build large AI models and nobody else should, there should be no open source stuff. The malicious actors will use it for malicious purposes anyway. These companies all give out APIs. You can pay $20 and start using you can start integrating some of these models in your business workflows instantly. So what will the malicious actors use these APIs from these large companies for? They'll use it for malicious purposes. And the malicious actors with enough resources will do it on their own. They'll build their models anyway. So what do you get by gatekeeping black box models in the hands of 2, 3, 4 companies? You don't really prevent rogue actors, the really serious ones. This stuff will be used for varying degrees of malicious purposes anyway, as long as it's a product in the market, which it is today. It has been from day one. And then you end up with 3, 4 tech giants, behemoths, who have the power to change reality. If AI is integrated everywhere to redefine reality, if AI is to be seen as a dynamic technology, multidimensional technology, which can deal with anything, be it your abstract thoughts, be it scientific matters, be it absolutely anything at all, it seems absurd that the capability to build, control, tweak the ways how these models work, direct them in push them in certain directions, political, ideological, whatever, should rest in the hands of 3 or 4 companies. That logically seems absurd. So if this stuff is going to proliferate everywhere, whether you like it or not, whether it's at the hands of anyone and it will proliferate because it's software, then it makes sense that everybody should have it. A small startup should have it. A civil society org should have it. An individual should have it. So maybe it's a philosophical take, but given these realities that it proliferates and abusers are going to abuse it anyway, I would prefer that this be in the hands of everyone, as many people as possible, in an open, decentralized, distributed manner, so that everybody kind of keeps everybody else in check somehow. It's not going to be simple or smooth or clean, but seems much better than all this insane power being concentrated in the hands of, I don't know, like 4 or 5 global entities.
Sure, sure. I understand that, but if we were to take the DeepSeek example right now, very it was adopted very rapidly upon release, but also what happened is that there were many reports by which sort of talked about the grave cybersecurity failures that it may have reinforced. Like, for example, from what I've read, researchers discovered that a that a publicly exposed DeepSeek database that leaked a lot of chat histories. There were a lot of API keys, and just backend details. And other than that, like what from a lot of sort of reputed cybersecurity firms, like their red teaming, etc., showed that the like DeepSeek's whatever safety guardrails they have put in place were extremely easy to jailbreak. So do you now, as a researcher, what I wonder is that um, is it like, if you could sort of explain this from a more first principles point of view, which is that, is it by design that an open source model like a DeepSeek R1 would be more prone to the safeguards being removed when they're like when a model is downloaded locally and it's fine tuned, etc., or like, is it easier to jailbreak an OpenAI model than it is to a closed model? Or is this, or are these criticisms specific to, say, the DeepSeek model, which may not have, where there are arguments that that in order to sort of innovate and quickly release a model, they may have not placed enough safety features, etc. So how would you sort of speak to this? Yeah.
I think multiple unrelated issues have been conflated here. The security incidents, security breaches, etc., that were reported, uh, it had nothing to do with AI. It had absolutely nothing to do with DeepSeek's models. So DeepSeek, just like all other AI companies, built a chat UI web app where you could create an account, log in, and start chatting. So they built a web-based chat software that had issues. It had nothing to do with AI. They were great at building a sophisticated AI model, but they didn't really pay much attention to the chat UI they built around it. And they left some database stuff, whatever, open on the chat UI. So absolutely unrelated to the AI model itself. However, I remember it being conflated as issues with open source, nothing to do with open source, absolutely unrelated, or DeepSeek's own AI models. Again, absolutely nothing there. Now, your second question, is it easier to tweak or jailbreak? Now, I think jailbreak is also a bit of a problematic term. The creator of a model, DeepSeek or anybody else, they can try and code in arbitrary constraints and frameworks into the model. That's the jail. The definition of a jail itself is completely arbitrary. You can have certain models refuse to talk about certain topics, censorship. So the whole concept of a jail is very ill-defined. Meta has its own jails. DeepSeek has its own jails. Whoever creates a model they build a model in their image. They build in societal compulsions, governmental compulsions, etc. into it. That's a very societal thing to do. If you're in China, you have to conform to Chinese laws. If you're in India, you have to conform to Indian laws. So the jail that you build, it has no universal definition in a model. Every model maker has made arbitrary jails that they subjectively decide upon. So when somebody bypasses that for their own subjective reasons, we call it jailbreaking. But it's not a legal construct. it's not even a technical construct in that sense because it's all random and arbitrary anyway. So, what is the risk of somebody subjectively breaking out of some subjective constraint somebody imposed? I don't really know. Now, I know that it's not a black and white thing. I'm not saying that breaking all sorts of jails inside models is the right thing to do. I'm just saying it's not black and white. Uh, and there are clearly illegal things that a model maker would have tried to jail off within a model. And if somebody jailbreaks it to commit those illegal things, that's a very well understood thing. This thing is illegal. But a lot of jails inside models are not illegal per se. They're very subjective. So my view there is that it's very nuanced. I don't have a clear answer. And what are the security implications? Again, it's very nuanced. If somebody uses an AI model to commit an illegal act as per the definition of current laws, it's illegal. Now, what is really special about an AI open source or non open source model there? If you're using a hammer to commit an illegal act, it's illegal. If you're using llama open weights to commit an illegal act, it's illegal.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So now, if we were to sort of shift the conversation to India's position, but sticking with some of these policy considerations, one key concern that I've heard being voiced is that relying on open source foundation models, one risk sort of attached to it with an entire, say, country's ecosystem building on all these open source foundation models is that they could subsequently be made proprietary or closed source in the future. And this concern appears to have motivated, at least in some part, some degree, the government of India's decision to fund a homegrown large language model under the India AI mission. So now, could you maybe give us some understanding, perhaps from historical examples of traditional software? Because to my mind, this couldn't be a new problem, right? Because that the same concern of, say, an open source software tool or web server or some of the things that we rely on for our, daily
Absolutely
lives.
everything, like 90% of all software.
Yeah, I mean, I can throw some facts out there. 80% of the world's phones are on Android. About 60% of all, websites are on like the Apache and Nginx web servers and so on. But my point is that could this concern still be to some extent well founded, because there has been a shift of companies like OpenAI towards a more closed model of development over time. For commercial interests or perceived need for greater control, etc. Or do you think the strategic incentive towards open source by companies that we earlier spoke about, the market push for it, do you think that is strong enough to self-correct for a problem like this? Could you maybe speak to this fear of open source becoming proprietary in the future?
I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding. It's an ignorance of history, which is what I was saying earlier. Open source and free software, free and open source software, it's played out over 40 years. The world today runs on it. Trillions and trillions of dollars of tech valuations depend on open source software. And somebody making making open source software and suddenly turning it proprietary is not a new thing. We generally call it a rug pull, just like elsewhere. But like I said, it's a very fundamental and grave misunderstanding of how open source works. When you attach an open source license and distribute open source software or open source AI, whatever, once it's out there, it's out there. Maybe the next release or the next iteration, you can say, okay, I'm not going to release it anymore. But whatever you push out, it's out there. You can't retroactively make old stuff that you've released closed source. It's simply impossible. It's legally also impossible because if it's open source, it comes with a license, which is a contract. Now, you can't retroactively void your contract from 20 years ago saying, everything I've done, everything I've released so far, I want to take it back. Not possible. Doesn't happen. This has happened. This continues to happen practically on a monthly basis in the open source world. Some very popular open source software, which have become popular by virtue of being open source, by virtue of people adopting it, driven by commercial interests, suddenly they become closed source. So 15, 20 years worth of software that they've released, updates they release, it's all there, out there, used, being open. People are free to do whatever they want with it. But the 21st version in the 21st year suddenly is closed source. So, of course, there's a big backlash. Community hates them. They're accused of rug pull. They'll start losing developer mindshare. These are social dynamics that take care of it. So, social plus market dynamics take care of open source rug pulls. There's decades worth of evidence. I'll cite one very simple example. Redis is a piece of open source software widely used. It's an in-memory database and widely used, widely loved, widely used because it's open source. It went closed source, I think, several months ago. And
Sorry, could you explain what, like in regular people terms, what does that mean? Like how would it interface with my life?
Redis is a database. So
okay.
It's not something that you see on the front end. It sits on the servers acting as a database, high performance in-memory database, in a very technical construct. But it's everywhere. We use it. Zerodha uses it. The government of India uses it. Everybody uses it. It's one of those, it's a de facto database. And it's been out there for 10, 15 years, I think. So last year, driven by commercial motivations, they stopped the open source version, saying we will not release open source updates anymore. We are going to now turn this into a whole different thing. They turned it proprietary. There was a big backlash, ideological conflicts, and Redis is used by all the big tech megacorps also. So generally what happens in the open source world is that stuff gets forked, F-O-R-K, and that word is used heavily. It's also one of the fundamental freedoms that the open source license accords to you. If you don't like something about the way somebody's building software and it's open source, you can take it, you can change it, and you can make it in your own image. It's called forking. So Redis got forked into something called Valkey, and big tech also committed to it. Now, a lot of developers who are openly contributing to Redis suddenly move to Valkey. This is the mechanism. Forking is the inherent mechanism by which open source rug pulls are taken care of, shaped by societal, social plus market dynamics. Same thing applies to AI. Imagine an entity was using DeepSeek's open source version. They were improving it. They were doing whatever. 2025 May, DeepSeek comes out and says that we are stopping DeepSeek open source. From now on, all our models will be proprietary. So what? You have all the versions, prior versions. You are building on an open source version anyway. Now, yes, it sucks that you will not get further updates, but the liberty and freedom, you have the choice. You're not really left holding the bag. On the other hand, if let's say an OpenAI says that starting tomorrow we are stopping our chat API access, dead. And if your company depend on them, you're dead. That's it. You have to pay license, and yet they have to keep providing that software as a service thing to you. And the moment they stop, everybody depending on them is dead, right? So that is the difference between open source and the sovereignty it brings in terms of liberty and freedom to self-host and use and do whatever you want versus proprietary. And going back to what I said earlier, any government seeing open source as a risk is fundamentally misunderstanding what open source is, its social dynamics, its technical dynamics of forking, and not and its legal dynamics, which is you can't just make everything retroactively inaccessible.
Great, that's very helpful. So I'm moving towards some of my last sort of questions now, and one of them is, I guess, just a short one to get your perspective on it, which is, India has shown some sort of support towards open source AI. Like, I mean, in the Paris AI Action Summit, PM Modi had sort of called for the need to develop such systems because they can enhance trust and transparency and so on. There have been other efforts on the state government level, but the foundation model that is being built as part of the India AI mission is not expected to be open source, or at least not in the beginning. And so, that remains to be seen. Now, again, there are a lot of considerations that would go into a decision like that, I'm sure, again, strategic and so on. But from a technical point of view, what implications do you think it could have on the startup developer ecosystem, like again, is like one interesting counterpoint or in support of this decision could be that by allowing a period of exclusive commercialization that will allow the model to compete globally, perhaps, and account for some of its development costs and so on. Do you think this is a very big decision? Do you think this, like the implication of saying that, okay, we're not going to open source it right now, does that matter too much? Or because it's, again, like I mentioned earlier, there aren't just two ways of releasing, right? You can release immediately, you can have a staged release, a more controlled distribution, as some companies have done. So yeah, I just wanted your perspective on this, since it's a bit topical right now. Yeah.
I'm not privy to the exact details of these uh, decisions, but not a national mission not backing an open source effort, I think is extremely unfortunate. A startup popping up, raising private capital, building a private model, that's what we've seen, is absolutely fair, I guess, because people are free to do whatever they want to do. Startups are free to do whatever they want to do. And venture capitalists don't pour in money for something to be distributed for free. So that's the very nature of that sort of capital. But at a national level, from a sovereign perspective, I don't think it is a great idea. There are many reasons, and one fundamental, simple, common sense thing is public money, public code. If public's money, if the taxpayer citizens' money is going to be pushed into innovation, let's say cutting edge innovation, and that is in the hands of a closed group of people, that seems philosophically and fundamentally incorrect. And a national mission's goal should be to push widespread innovation, decentralized innovation in as many quarters of the society or the nation as possible. So by closing something up that's dead, I mean, that's simply impossible. Uh, so it's unfortunate if the national mission is pushing for a closed source model. I think any positives it may have, and I don't really even see any positives, will far outweigh, sorry, any, the negative aspects of it from all of these philosophical and tangible aspects will far outweigh any little positive impact it will have. Also, if you just prop up a small handful of closed source players and you open them up to being used by the entire market out there, that brings us to that whole big debate that we have right now in India, which is, should India be a user of AI, some use case stuff, or should we have the capability to do more fundamental innovation? Now, if the national mission is pushing for a set of closed source players to build something internally and only offer it as a software as a service so that others, other commercial players can come use it, then that's the very antithesis of pushing for fundamental national strength and the ability to build these things, right? So I think it's very unfortunate. And I don't think it makes sense.
Understood. So that just brings me to my final question, and we're kind of out of time, but this was really interesting to talk to you about. If we go beyond models, right? I mean, we talk about open source AI in the context of models only. But I do think that we should go beyond models. So could you maybe just in 10 seconds tell us, like, what do you think India can do? Where is the greatest room for improvement when it comes to setting up an open source AI development ecosystem or building it, and what would it take to get there?
If you look at the biggest players in AI right now, even the organizations who build open source stuff, people, large AI companies who've done closed source models, these have all been companies. These have all been private actors doing it. No nation has really explicitly enabled an open source distributed uh, ecosystem where there is large scale participation or large scale decentralized innovation as a matter of policy. So that would be very novel. And I think that is something we could do.
Thanks so much, Kailash. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you. I think we've managed to delve into a wide range of issues. And I think I learned a lot from this conversation. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your perspective with us. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Shruti. Thank you. It was a good conversation. Thank you.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. Make sure you don't miss it. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To learn more about our research and team, you can visit us on our website at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media on X, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening. See you next time.